I'm Michelle Leduc Catlin. Welcome to episode 4 of season 2 of Trued Up, the podcast that invites you to be the change. I fell in love with Dr. Laura Braden the first moment I met her. Brilliant, bold, and beautiful, the former molecular biologist was one of the first scientists to speak out against the COVID mandates and genetic testing on humans, as well as one of the first to give testimony at Canada's National Citizens Inquiry in 2023. Her ethical and moral stand cost her her job and her academic position, neither of which rendered her silent. It was near the end of last summer that we were able to sit down for this delicious and joyful conversation, and even more of what Dr. Laura suggested has now been proven correct. Dr. Braden is the epitome of why I started this podcast. She is someone willing to objectively examine her opinions and change her mind, as you will hear. She is willing to stand up and speak out for what is right and true, and to find compassion and possibility at a time when these qualities are most needed. And she is my guest today on Trued Up. So first, I just want to start with hi.
Hi. Nice to see you.
It's good to see you. I was thinking about how to start this conversation, right? And I have to start with meeting you in Nova Scotia. And I was so impressed, not just with you as a scientist, but you as a human being. And I'm just so delighted that you're here with me today.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. That was quite, I think about back to that time. That was 2 years ago. Oh my gosh. And I was just like, just such a hot mess after doing that presentation. I was sweating and there were so many people talking, and I just was like, hope this lady has her stuff together. I'd love to have a conversation. And it was just a really nice landing spot after that testimony. But
so
anyways, yeah.
We're all a hot mess because we were figuring this out. And so for people who don't know, we were at the first set of hearings for the National Citizens Inquiry in Canada. You were an expert witness. I was the spokesperson, and none of us knew how this was going to go, right? So it was like, I'm interviewing the witness, right? What do I do? I'm going to ask her the things that, maybe she couldn't say on the stand, and then I'm going to hug her.
It was awesome. It was so awesome. Yeah.
So now, finally, all this time later, we finally get to have a face-to-face real conversation. So let's get into it.
Awesome.
So I guess I want to start with giving people some idea of who you are from your professional's point of view, and then we'll get into more of the personal. So tell us about your training as a scientist and what you did.
Okay. Yeah. So, my background is in molecular biology and immunology. So I have a doctorate in molecular immunology from the University of Victoria in British Columbia. And so I did that, and then I was recruited for a job. So that basically was molecular geeking out all the time, right? So I was studying how hosts and pathogens interact at the genetic level, and it's just amazing, Michelle. It was And actually, I was called originally. I was thinking I was going to go into human medicine, neurology. So I also did a degree in neuroscience and neurology. And then at some point, I decided that I didn't really I'm going to be honest, I didn't like people that much. I don't know if it was a phase I was going through, but I was like, I'm more called to research, academic research. And then I just found myself with this amazing opportunity, largely funded by the government. So NSERC funding, which is National Institute of Science and Engineering Council funding. Did my PhD at UVic, and then after my PhD, I was either going to go to Norway, Chile, or here on the east coast of Canada. And I was recruited for a job to come to PEI by my mentor at the time. I was following his research, very impressed. Another young scientist, just loved him. Thought he was so cool. I was like, I want to work with him. And so he convinced me to come to PEI for a postdoctoral fellowship in pathobiology and microbiology. And so I did. And during that time, it didn't take long for the only single person on PEI to get shacked up. Anyways, I found my husband, my now husband, and we settled. Yeah, genetic diversity. Woo! No, and I laugh because he's also from BC, so the two British Columbians found each other. And then we started a family, and then and during that time, I also did another postdoc at the Atlantic Veterinary College, in microbiology, virology, pathobiology, and then landed my big girl job, right? So you do school, postdocs it's a lot of schooling still. So you're still kind of finding your way in molecular for a bio. So then I got my job at a biotech company, still maintained adjunct faculty status because I love teaching. Like even throughout my PhD, I was in there like a dirty shirt with the young grads, teaching, mentoring. I really enjoy that. So I was still a faculty position. And then
I see that you would be an amazing teacher, and
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you notice that at the NCI? I was like, here, kids, is a DNA strand, and I like that.
Well, thank goodness, because the rest of us who are not science geeks, like you made things understandable. I mean, a lot of it, I'll be honest, a lot of it was like, but mainly I could follow and understand. Anyway, carry on.
Thank you. Yeah. So I love teaching, and so at my job with the biotech firm, I elevated very quickly. So my research, I used to travel all over the world to present my research. And I was in cutting edge biotechnology, something called CRISPR, which is gene editing. You've probably heard of gene editing. I was just starting to build my program within the company in gene editing for disease resistance in aquatic animals. It was just amazing. I was building my dream team. And then decided that I wasn't okay with genetic experiment on humans and spoke out against it. And then the rest is history.
Wow, you were against genetic testing on humans?
Oh, I know. Imagine, huh? Imagine.
So without getting into certain words that might get us kicked off of certain platforms,
Yes.
how did you what was that process? So you're in this dream job, building your dream team, and you discover what?
Well, so basically at the beginning, because a lot of my research expertise is reading genetic code and being able to look for genes in genetic sequence, so much of it. So big into bioinformatics. So reading the papers and the research that describes genomes of organisms, whether that be bacteria or virus. So I happened upon the genetic sequence of a virus I don't know what I can say, in 2020 anyways. And okay. Yeah. And so that genome contained elements that I recognized from my experience as being human made, recombinant in nature. So that SARS-CoV-2 sequence was not natural. It wasn't where there was stuff off, right? And when I went to bring this up with my peers, they were very offended that I found it, and they were just thinking it was a mistake. Anyways, it ended up being true, as we know. That's been validated. That was there at the very beginning, and I was like, that's a red flag for me. Why aren't we caring more about this? This isn't coming from a bat. This is a joke. And then after that, all the lies just kept on building, right? So it was just that one lie was the first lie for me, but every single subsequent argument for masking, for social distancing, for all of that stuff was just a lie. And I couldn't sit back.
Okay, I want to ask you about that, about not being able to sit back. But I first want to ask you, what was it like as a scientist whose job it is to bring forth proper information, facts, to be met with hostility? Like what?
It was so concerning. It was so concerning because not only was it just the general public that was meeting me with hostility, but it was people that until this moment in time, I deeply respected. Like my mentor that I spoke about, this argument over masking. And I said, like, We don't use you need a negative pressure room and like a hazmat suit if you're going to protect yourself against virus like this. What are you thinking? And the response was just the regurgitation of the mainstream media mantra. Well, it's for your safety. What? Like, and I remember laughing, like, no, you're kidding, right? No, I'm not kidding. So it was concerning, Michelle. It was, it deeply upset what I had felt as sort of admiration, deep-seated respect for these people. It's sort of hard to maintain that feeling in your heart about them when you know that relationship is compromised now, so that was hard. Mm-hmm.
You know what? I want to talk a bit about that, because I think this is something that many of us struggle with, right? People who we previously had so much admiration for in whatever field, So for me, I was an actor. There were many, obviously, celebrities, who, like, really, what do celebrities know about science, right? If that's the first thing, but so willingly went along with a narrative without questioning it. And, so it's deeply disappointing, I think, for many of us, right? Whether it was people we admired or just people we knew, people in our families, right? What do you think? Well, first of all, I think it's reassuring for people to understand that it happened to, highly educated people who knew better, who knew the science behind, for example, masking. How did you work through that? How were you able to overcome that in those relationships? Like, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I think one of the reasons why it didn't, I've always had zero cares about what other people think about me. Like, since I've always been the one to not care and do what I think is right. Like, even from like high school or even before then, like, people called me names. I was bullied a lot as a child, like a big time bullied, actually. And it didn't bother me. Well, it did at the time, but I just rose above it. So I think I've always had that. And I blame my parents largely for instilling self-confidence to just rise above people. So the blame is on you, Dad. But yeah, so not caring that I was being ridiculed because I was confident in the truth. Like, if you're not confident in what you define as the truth, then you can be shaken in your resolve. And I find that you have to pick what you think is the truth, and however that is informed, whether it's by facts, whether it's by your belief system, whatever you think is the truth, and that truth should be paramount at your foundation, and it should be unshakable. And so for me, I knew what the truth was, and it was unshakable. And so these people who were coming at me, whether it be colleagues or the general public or, the people trying to scare me into wearing masks in stores or to get my mail, I would just sort of not laugh at them, but sort of a lot of pity. And that helped me kind of navigate that, because the truth is the truth. You can't change the truth because, you know what I mean? Like, you're painting lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so much I want to say about what you just said. One thing is, you just gave me a new read on the on the saying, "The truth shall set you free." Because when you have the truth, you're just free to be yourself, right? There's no concern about, like, what people think. There is none of that, because it's just the truth, like you said.
That's right.
There was something else about the truth. I think one of the hardest things, and I've had a couple of recent conversations where I was rather vocal about the truth, and I see that most people at this stage, they're so embedded, obviously not because of the evidence, right? But they're so embedded in their opinion that they are terrified that they could have been wrong, So not the people who knew better, that's a whole other category, right? But for the vast majority of people who were just duped into thinking that they were following science. How do you think we deal with that? Do we deal with it? Do you have conversations with people? Have you written people off? Like, for me, this
Yeah.
is, I cannot seem to give up on people, you know, in general. I mean, some people, yeah, it's like, you know, I wish you well. It's their journey, all of that. But I'd love to know your thoughts on how you do
Yeah,
it.
and there's people like that for me too, Michelle. See, the biggest thing that you just said that I think everybody needs to maintain in their brain is that we were all duped. And we are in different phases of our perspectives evolving. Some people, for whatever reason, were able to get there quicker, but now we're all walking through this path, this fire. We've walked through the fire. What I find unforgivable is when you're given a new perspective and or a new set of information or new evidence, or you can see it with your own two eyes and you refuse to change your perspective. That is an unforgivable thing for me. So most people a lot of people, I shouldn't say most, know and have said, like, I can't believe I did that. I'm never going to do that again. And I'm so glad that I listened to you, Laura. I didn't inject my kids. Like, God bless you. Like, but I did that and wow. Like, I can't believe I wore masks for 2 years. That's ridiculous. I'll never do that again.
That is so hopeful that there are
It
people
is. That's right.
That is so hopeful. It's the people who just can't, like, their identity, they're so, you know, tied in. And I don't know, maybe they were jerks during that time, right? And maybe that makes it more dug in. But it's those people who just can't. I mean, I know you can't convince anybody, right? You can present them with the truth, but it's really great to hear.
I would add in one more thing that I think that the biggest hurdle for people is their ego and the pride. The human ego is preventing a lot of transformation, and it's because they went along with something, and the cognitive dissonance that's now preventing them. Like, I can't imagine, but imagine for 1 second that you recommended your children have this.
I know.
And now you know, and now you're presented with evidence of genetic integration, which is happening all the time, right? So all the papers coming out, whatever's happening, all this disclosure, and you know that now. If you were to admit that, I don't know that the trauma on you as a parent. Would you forgive yourself?
Yeah.
That's a self-preservation. Yes.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah.
I think they will be the last people to admit what happened. I think it's too much for many people in that scenario. Talk a little bit about genetic integration, just so people understand what that means.
Well, one of the things that I testified about was data coming out from a few labs, one in the US, and now it's been repeated across the world. Big lab in Guelph, Ontario. Dr. Speaker's done it several times. Japan, Norway. There's a number of different labs, Germany, who have repeated this data and shown that there's massive amounts of DNA contamination in the injectables, both Moderna and Pfizer. And that was concern number one, because what happens is when you're injected with DNA, double-stranded DNA, there's a potential for that DNA to get into your DNA. I mean, and there's a lot of other things that have to happen for that to actually be the case. But we were assured that wasn't there. We were assured what was there, and it was just, whatever they said, but that wasn't it. There was DNA contamination, and it was very, very highfold. In some cases, 1,000 times higher than the background acceptable limit. And now we're finding out that Health Canada actually knew about it. There's a bunch of emails coming out. There's this one guy on Twitter, his name's Scoop Magoo. He's been doing FOIPs like you can't believe. He's uncovering this data, and it would just shock you. Like if every Canadian knew that Health Canada PHAC was hiding from them what was in there, they knew there was an oncogene called SV40, that element that Pfizer actually hid from regulators. And that is a really concerning piece, because that piece of DNA, SV40, actually allows the other DNA to integrate. So you're taking exogenous, not from you, like foreign DNA that you've been injected with, can then, in theory, incorporate itself into your DNA. And that makes you, number one, like, let's call a spade. That's genetically modifying an organism, which is genetic modification of humans, if it actually does happen. And then let's just talk about the consequence of that, which are broadly just terrible in all these different ways. The fact is that they did this without testing. They lied to the Canadian public, the public of the world, and they injected billions of people with potential integrating DNA. And now what they're finding is, in some cases, there is evidence of the DNA in the organism. So, I mean, it's not funny. It's terrifying,
no,
actually.
I know, but I think we laugh. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I hear horrible news, sometimes my first reaction is to laugh.
Me too.
Like a nervous tick.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a nightmare. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to dwell on it, but I do want to just touch on it, right?
Yeah.
What are the potential implications?
Well, cancer, number one. Like whenever you integrate or you change, cells are delicate. The cellular process in the human body is a delicate process. There's many checks and balances. Things happen for a reason. When you throw in strange pieces of DNA that don't belong in the human body, they can induce mutations. They can induce, oncogenesis, which is the development of cancer cells. And, you pair that with the turbo cancer epidemic that is being reported on a large scale. And it's hard to not, there's no, of course, causation there. It's correlational, but turbo cancers are a thing. And that shouldn't be happening in the ways that it's happening. So we just talk about that. The other thing is if you think about integration of this DNA in cells, the normal cells, like your epithelial cells or endothelial cells or hair follicles or whatever cells that are just in your body and then they die, that's fine. That's one thing. But if there's integration in your gametes, which are your, the eggs and the sperm, which then go on to make another individual, if it's integrated into those kinds of cells and those cells, are we passing this down? Is it becoming a permanent integration? That's a concern. And then, so there's cancers, there's passing it down to our next generation, which is just insane, Michelle. Like I laugh, it's the same as you. It's just insane because everything that we're talking about should have been checked off by these idiots before they started injecting billions of people. And I quote, they didn't do this because genotoxicity wasn't deemed valid. Well, they knew so there should have been some kind of, it's just insane. So the other thing is when you have these genomic elements, they're producing things that they're not expecting. And I think there was a paper that was recently published where 8% of injections are producing not spike. So what are the proteins? I don't know, but when you start talking about abhorrent protein production, proteins that cause prions, which they know is like when you have misfolded proteins, that's a pathology. And then you have cells producing proteins that don't belong to those cells. Well, that's the basis for autoimmunity. That is the basis for why your body starts to attack itself, because it doesn't recognize the things that should be there. It's just, and so that's the big concerns.
So much of the manipulation and mind control exerted on the general public to comply with unscientific mandates and protocols wouldn't have worked if we understood the power of programming and how it's used by governments and media. Not just as a whole, but individually. Until we understand our own personal programming, our own susceptibility, we are at risk. This is why I became a certified self-sabotage coach, studying with world-renowned mind control and health expert Jason Christoff. I could see my own susceptibility. I learned about how the programming all around us worked to keep me from thriving physically, intellectually, financially. We're living in extraordinary times, and we will either succumb to the constant negative programming or we will become alchemists and transmute our challenges into victories. We will become the people we've been waiting for. If you're interested in working with me, either in a group or one-on-one as a coach or a speaker, email me at michelle@gatheryourwits.com and let's have a conversation. Now back to my conversation.
I want to talk about the insanity. So I want to come back to that. But there's something I just want to, again, not dwell on a lot, but this whole, it seems to be part of the mind control, the repetitive programming, people talking about causation, correlation versus causation, people who really don't know what that means. and using it as a kind, like, what do you think about that?
Correlation versus causation. I mean, there's a lot of examples where you can look at things happening in synchronicity and then people drawing the conclusion, well, this thing happened because this thing made it happen, whereas they're just going along the same trajectory. So that's like when that's not causative. Those two things aren't interacting. They're correlational, but they're not interacting. Yeah. But when they start throwing that term out all the time and they've been brainwashing the public, oh, well, that, you died 2 days after injection, but that's just a correlation. Well, there's something called the Bradford Hill criteria, which is a criteria that epidemiological research heavily relies on, that sort of blows the causation versus correlation argument out of the water. So there's 9 different criteria, and with things like spurious heart attacks in healthy 30-year-olds after injection within a certain amount of time, that's temporal correlation. There's a bunch of them. I can't remember what they all are, but they're highly cited. And Dr. McCullough talks about this all the time, that 7 out of the 9 and sometimes 9 out of the 9 are satisfied with myocarditis, with all the heart disease happening in really healthy male adults, the turbo cancers, dying in your sleep of 17-year-olds like Sean Hartman. That kind of stuff doesn't happen normally. And so for a doctor to then gaslight, and that's, I mean, I'm getting a little hot, but that's the point, right? We've been taught to gaslight people.
It's my favorite thing too.
Yeah. I'm sweating. It's like, we've been taught to gaslight people on their experiences and somehow your experience is invalid if it's correlational and it's anecdotal. Well, okay. We can talk about a lot of anecdotal things that should be actual fact, but because they're not backed by a clinical stage 3 GMP trial that cost you $20 million, it somehow doesn't matter, so that gaslighting is intrinsic. And that, I think, is a product of the Rockefeller School of Medicine. And it's, we can talk about that, but I think it's really sad because people who have been, young lady that I know gets injected, gets Bell's palsy, goes to the doctor says, well, there's no evidence. What do you mean? I didn't have this going in. The gaslighting of the public. And I used to do the same thing. Well, your kid was fine and then it got autism after its child MMR. You have no proof. But the parent had proof. The parent said, no, my kid was laughing and hugging and crying and giving me eye contact and totally verbal. And then it was injected and all those things went away. That's all the proof that should be required. But somehow this gaslighting and that correlational argument has made it like invalid somehow. And it's total BS as far as I'm concerned. Total.
I love that because I think if anything good comes from all of this, one of the things is really appreciating our inherent knowing, getting to understand some of the
100%.
more less perhaps scientifically understood aspects of being human, right? That parents, as a mother, you would know that there are things about your kid that you just know. Right. And to dismiss that, you're right. It's like insult to injury. Not only are you dealing with a damaged child, but now you're not even being believed for what you absolutely know in your bones.
Yeah, the intuition. And you're right. It's a deep inherent intuition, and humans have that. It's a sixth sense, whatever you want to call it. That's there for a reason. That's your guiding principles. And you should never dismiss your intuition. And that sort of beautiful piece of humanity has been kicked to the curb in lieu of scientific evidence that most of the time is biased and bought by big pharma. So I
think that's been, again, looking on the upside, I've certainly come to appreciate that. A lot of people are really starting to understand that, oh, right. So these studies are funded by people who have a vested interest, right? And they're the ones who have the money to do it. And then they're the ones promoting it to the government on TV, through your news. It's all a corrupt system,
Yes.
So
100%.
That's the good news. But it's so interesting how people use these arguments when for me, it's like, it really is rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, right? It's like, okay, so, if you're looking at maybe it's, correlation, not causation, shouldn't we just like use the precautionary principle and just
Ding, 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 Michelle for the win. You would have done a better job than Health Canada already. You're hired.
It just seems to me
It is.
that, if you don't know, just don't take the risk. So
yes.
I want to talk about your hotness, right? So there was something, I just got to check. There was something, I had made a note to myself earlier, like clearly there's an obvious separation, between science, which requires intellectual rigor, right? And as much objectivity as possible, because, we're not objective beings, but, as much as possible. But when you're talking about the impact on human beings, how do you feel about, okay, let me just say what I want to say and then you can just comment. So is the strict absence of an emotional engagement with what's potentially happening with human beings, is that always a good thing?
Well, if you're a robot, if you live in a robot world of transhumanism, maybe, I think that because that we've over separated it. Like I do understand the need for rigor. I do understand, like I'm scientific, like there's things that need to happen so things are done in reproducibility, consistency in results, things like that. But when you separate the need for human empathy or contribution of the human spirit into whatever it is, you lose that piece of the puzzle that is required for the how or for the why. Like, you do all these things, you know what I mean? And
so what is the point? Like stepping back, what is the point of all this? What is the point of this research? What is the point of this medicine?
Yes. Yeah. And it's not just to sell more pills. It's not just to, produce as many animals as you can. Like, what is the point? And then you get lost. Like, I think a good example of this is the whole biotechnological industry. What is the point? It's not to say that we can do it, because we can do anything. You're so creative. We have the ability to innovate. We have the ability to do anything. But should we be doing those things? It's not a matter of if, it's ought we be doing these things? And, like genetic, the idea of transforming an organism. I will be quite honest, I think I struggle with this, because now that I know what I know, after I went behind the wizard wall, like, open the curtain. But I struggle with this because I still believe that there's utility in trying to be better and do things better. Like a good example, on PEI, we grow potatoes. We grow a lot of potatoes, and potatoes are a 90-day crop, sometimes 120. And every 2 weeks, the farmers spray those potatoes for blight. Every 2 weeks. There's a spray. There is a way to not do that by transforming those potatoes to be blight resistant, genetically modifying them. Now, if you were to take those two things and look back on them, one, we're using a lot of fungicide. And what's the impact on the environment to get the potato? People, do you want to eat the potato? Like all those things. And then the other one is as well, it's a genetically modified organism. But like that conversation doesn't happen enough. Like, do I think it's better to not spray fungicide every 2 weeks and get it everywhere and do whatever? Yes, I think that's a better result. And, or drought resistance or whatever it is. But what's happened along the way, Michelle, is that these beautiful potential technologies have been circumvented and sabotaged by the pharma, by the big ag, and that need and that greed you lose the human piece. And it's all about the money. And then it becomes, Monsanto owning seeds. Like what the... and so then there's this negative evil that is used. We just kick ourselves. It's this circle. We we two steps forward and then 10 steps back because of our inability to just do things for the human altruistic reason as opposed to just getting ahead. And I think that is one of the reasons why we struggle with these, and it becomes this negative thing. And you saw it, like biotech. Can I say I would ever work in that industry again? No. Like it's horrible because the human piece is gone, and you have big everything controlling your interest. And it's not about the science. It's not about making something cool. It's about what's going to make the most money and how can the shareholders profit.
I think that that human element you talk about, this is the thing that is missing. But the absolutely heinous part of it is that most people are walking around good people with a conscience, with compassion. And this has been used against us so that people can't imagine that this could exist. And I think that, so it kind of brings me to my next question, but what I hear missing is, bioethics in every area, right? Like, I mean, every industry, every segment of society, every institution should have some ethics component. It seems so obvious because I think we walk around with our human values and think that is happening, that's automatic, but we clearly need to have something in place. So yeah. I'd like your thoughts on that, but also going back to what you said earlier about an insane world. So how do we be sane in an insane world?
Well, yeah. I mean, to speak to the ethical part, there's always I think that we placate the requirement for a bioethics by always having an ethical committee on everything. Like there's always an ethical committee. Is this, animal safety, human safety, the ethics involved. But I don't think it's enough. And I think they just do that as a check so that it makes you look good, right? And it makes us feel, okay, great. We're considering the world and we're considering all our human, like it's not real. It's just a checkbox. I think there needs to be more of a top-down approach in that. Unfortunately, I think that will never happen because in order for that to be true, there's going to be a reduction in profit. There's no way around that. And so I don't think that the way that it's set up now, leading in me to answer your second part of the question, the way that it's set up now, I don't think there's space for that. How do we become more sane is that we start again and we build our own institutions and we build our own, we start again. We don't have to work within this framework of brokenness. Like it's the insanity would be to do it again and expect a different result. Like clearly, the medical institutions, there's a lot of good doctors, but medicine as a whole, allopathic medicine is not holistic. It's based on the good clients out of us humans. Living on a tax farm. And, it's not meant to keep us healthy, or else the first thing they'd be doing is talking about what we're eating. One thing that I'm incredibly inspired by right now is what's happening in the US. And I have to bring it up because I think it's important that we bring it up. And it's the whole populist movement and what's happening with RFK Jr. and Donald Trump and those two people coming together. And what RFK has said several times is that and especially in the US, but you can say the same in Canada, is that our children are being poisoned as soon as they're born by the environment, by medicine, by the food. We're eating garbage food laced with whatever and calling it a day's a day. And it's being lobbied by the grain boards of Canada and whatever. It's just garbage. It's just garbage. So that's how we stop, is that we break free from that system, because we're not going to help that system right now. Maybe it'll catch up, and my hope is that it will, and that will be great. But in the meantime, grow your own food. In your meantime, there's a freedom farming community on PEI, and we barter and we talk shop and we learn the best practices, and we've got our back, got each other's back, and we have a community. And building those communities at grassroots levels gives us the resilience to be like, you know what, we're going to just do our own thing. And that's how I think we start. And you can see that already happening in academia as well. Like there's institutions that are building. Dr. Bridle is part of building like a different way of post-secondary education with I think Dr. Paness as well in Ontario. You might know more about that. I should know more about that. It's very interesting because they have a different way of doing it. And, that's just one example, but I think that's how we rise above.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's time to build a compelling alternative, something that people are just naturally drawn to because the system's broken.
How do you build a life in a broken system? Well, you start with yourself. You build your 5 pillars of strength: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and financial, so that you are strong in the face of whatever comes. We all have a tendency to self-sabotage in one area or another, but I'm here to tell you that it is not your fault. We are bombarded with programming designed to keep us weak, dependent, sick, and broke. And as someone who has been weak, dependent, sick, and broke, I can tell you that you do not have to stay there. As a certified self-sabotage coach, I work with clients one-on-one to distinguish their unique sabotaging patterns and habits. And I teach you how to reprogram for success in any area of life. If you'd like to have a conversation to see if this is a fit for you, email me at michelle@gatheryourwits.com. And now back to some empowering programming.
About a year or so ago, there was there's been a lot of contentious conversations and divisions and things like that. And I remember you spoke up very vocally online about somebody who was creating some division. And I was just like, wow. I was so impressed that you could do that. And I think, where does that come from? I mean, you said that your father instilled confidence in you, but
it's my dad. My dad's a very passionate person. And I think we're all a product. Well, we are, obviously we're a product of our parents. I just was, because I was bullied so much as a kid. And I think you either rise above it or you become a victim. And I was just like, and maybe my dad just told me, as a kid, you're better than everybody. You know what I mean? Don't worry, you're better than everybody and don't listen to them. That's coming out wrong. But I think giving children the confidence to speak out against those people, it happened very early. And I think also I always was drawn to being the protector, of people who were being bullied. Then I would, in high school, I remember just being standing up for them and being like, man, that's not okay. And it's sort of translated in through university. And I just was always the mother figure. In fact, I played varsity basketball at one point, and they called me mom. I remember that. It just came back to me because I was always the motherly figure, and just standing up for people, the little guy, and so it's funny because as I'm saying this out loud, I realized that I was always destined to help people, whether or not I wanted to at the moment, but that's right. And just be it. And now it's being a role model for my kids, and for other people, because I feel and you've probably heard of and seen the naked man, the psychological experiments with the naked man, or anything where there's one or two people that people can look towards as the guidance. So people don't want to go against the stream. We like to be in a pack. We're pack animals. We don't want to go against, and I don't mind for whatever reason. So if people can be buddies with me and get that courage and then go take it off and do it themselves, then that's amazing. And that's all I wanted to do. And when I spoke out against whatever we're going to call it, COVID schmovid, it wasn't an attack on the government. I wasn't being a rebel yet. I was just asking questions and expecting to be treated. I think one of the things, Michelle, too, is I expect to be treated a certain way. And my grandfather was an amazing war veteran. And I think the patriotic, I expect better we're going to fight for something we believe in is deep in my blood, deep in my bones. And so that's sort of translated. And now, all I can do is hope that I pass that on to my kids. And I think I have, because, they're we're freedom fighters too, mommy. And great. You know what? Good. You're little independent women. I'm paying for it. It's very challenging to have conversations, but you know what? I feel so good because they're going to be able to take care of themselves in this world.
Oh, so beautiful.
Yeah.
Two things struck me. I was in a conversation where, you're a scientist, right? It makes sense to speak out against, all the shenanigans. I said, look, I really didn't plan to spend my life talking about, medical treatments. I mean, this has nothing to do with I'm an artist, I was a director and an actor, and seriously, do I want to be talking about this? I mean, it's something that I think we feel compelled. For me, it was like it was not a choice. I mean, I get your background, right? What your father instilled in you. Why do you think it is that some people feel compelled to just stand up? Like, why do you think some of us just have to?
I think that, well,
and let me add this, or why some people don't.
Yeah, I think that's such a deep question. I do feel that some people, for whatever reason, don't want. It's like the hunter prey. I keep on going back to this disregard for yourself at the expense of others, or at the expense of what might happen. Like disregard for yourself just to do the right thing, and what that would mean in the caveman era. Like, okay, well, we were out there fighting saber-toothed tigers maybe, and the other people were back in the cave. I don't know, but there's got to be something along those lines psychologically, because people who want to do the right thing don't care what the consequences, and maybe I'm wrong, they don't care what the consequences are, because our principles are all we have to guide us, and those are stronger than the fear of death. Like doing the right thing for some people, and I think that has to do with the whole going against the grain versus standing up kind of argument. But I don't know. You have the people who are the non-player characters in this world, and I'll just say that, called NPCs. Like they're just good. Everybody else is doing the stuff, whether they're fighting or not fighting, but they're just good being in the middle, and they're just going to see what happens, and they're just going to go with the flow because then it's easier for them. They're non-player characters, right? Where were they when we weren't allowed to travel? Like they were just chilling. Maybe they didn't agree with it, but they didn't have the courage to speak out against. Or eat in a restaurant. Yeah. And so, but then I feel like those people aren't living the same kind of enriched life though, because those principles aren't there. Like, I wonder if you were a fly on the wall in their brain, like, is it the same? Are you still gaining the same values of speaking out? Because for me, like, I'm proud. I wouldn't have done it any different. I would have done it sooner, but I'm proud to have been a member of the fringe minority with unacceptable views, because at least I had principles. I would hate to not have any convictions and not have anything to believe in, or not have that courage to stand out. Like, what did that make you? I don't know.
I mean, I don't even know what to say, because I'm like, yes. Right? I think, I know that you have paid a cost for speaking out, right? I have paid a cost for speaking out, but there is no option. And I do believe that there is a richer life, that there is, I believe that we are being forged in that fire, that this is the opportunity to be our greatest selves. And how we be our greatest selves is we adhere to our values, to our principles. And sometimes it's really tough. Tell me, what is it that happened to you with your job, and what did it lead to?
I just have to say before I get into that, you said that way more eloquently than I was trying to. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. So what happened was my speaking out led to basically immediate dismissal. So I was terminated without cause for my job. In fact, it was so offensive. And I have it written in their letter, and I'm going to frame it one day and put it on the wall, because unfortunately, because we live on PEI, I wasn't able to secure any kind of legal representation. So they did get away with it. However, comeuppance and karma will come back, and it is already coming back. And whatever, we do the right thing regardless of what we're going to receive in the end. It happened for that reason. But basically what happened is my boss flew up from the US because the company was spread between Canada and the US. He came up and fired me on a Monday morning. I was escorted out of the building. I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to anybody. It was like a criminal. And I was like, and I sort of was laughing because it was so ridiculous. I'm like, I'm the only immunologist that works for you. But it was an FDA regulated environment. There was some shareholders that were big pharma, all that stuff. And they got away with it because they had the legal oomph, and all the legal aid was on retainer by the government. So we had no choice. Really, they got away with it. So what happened is I was fired from that job. Nothing. That was it. No severance, nothing. And then I was removed from adjunct faculty position at the college here, because, it just looked bad. They couldn't have anybody look bad that worked for them. It's just, nobody's got any backbone. I'm just like, are you guys all whatever? It was horrible though, right? Because I worked my literal butt off for most of my formative years to get where I was. And when you do that, if you can't help but let it define you, you probably felt the same way. This is what you were. This is what you lived for. I was still in the PhD mindset of working crazy hours, and it was amazing. And I was going to do this thing. And then you fall hard from that. But I fell into the lap of in the circle of the embrace of other scientists who also agreed with me and were reassuring that I didn't lose my mind, because a lot of times you can't help but think, am I crazy? Did I just lose it? Is everybody crazy? And so to know that I wasn't was helpful. And joining the ranks of people like Dr. Jessica Rose and Byron Bridle and all those, I was like, okay, it's not just me. Unfortunately, I was the only, and I still am the only person of my profession in the Maritimes to say anything, which is bizarre because there's a lot of people, but it's also the most heavily funded government area. So it sort of makes sense. And so then I fell from that, and there was a couple other things that happened, but what I came into was the realization that I was so heavily indoctrinated by big pharma, by that whole sort of top-down control of people with pharmaceuticals and drugs, that I was unable to see that most of the things that we can do to help ourselves are surrounding us in our environment. And I became totally consumed by trying to retroactively learn herbal medicine, that it's been amazing. But I was such a dummy, Michelle. You just, naturopaths, that's quacks. Oh yeah. That's dumb. All of our drugs come from plants. they're just patents.
To some degree, what the plants are actually doing really well.
It's just so crazy. So all that realization. So I founded a natural health, an apothecary, because I can't help but be I love the science and the research and everything. And there's a lot of people who really need it, who love it, and who want this. And I wanted to do it for my family. And then it just sort of blew up into this amazing thing. And so that's what I'm doing. And I mean, we're growing functional mushrooms, and I'm out foraging, and I'm teaching my girls to forage, and they're learning all about how to heal themselves. And then I also had the time to start what I love the most, which is horse breeding. So I'm doing horse, the silver linings can't be enumerated. Number one, I'm homeschooling my children because God knows we need to homeschool our children these days. So that wouldn't have been able to happen if I still had my long job, long out. Horses wouldn't have been able to happen. The other stuff wouldn't have been able to happen. And so all these things are, and now I'm helping people. It's just crazy, but it's a beautiful crazy, right? And we're fine financially. It was a nice paycheck, but it's not worth it. And I would never go back ever. And I have to say that I had the complete and 100% support of my husband before I even came out of the closet, stepped out. He was like, do it. Nobody is helping our children. They're trying to inject our 5-month-old, 6-month-old babies with this garbage. And I'm behind the scenes going, guys, like, this is bad. This is bad. Why are you doing this? And he's like, you got to. And so it was a family affair. Yeah.
Beautiful. I mean, it's so beautiful. I can, my situation is different in many, many ways, but I can certainly relate to the, like, I can just hear the joy of living a life consistent with your values, living a life true to what actually really matters to you,
Exactly.
So maybe it doesn't look the way you thought it would look, but wow.
No. Yeah. And a lot of the things that I wouldn't have even guessed in a million years, like, the whole concept of vaccination, I honestly thought that was the reason humans were alive. Like and that is because I went to school for almost 20 years. That's what happens. But, and now and everybody has, you can't help but see everywhere. There's evidence and people talking about it. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't give babies 72 injections before they're 2. That might be a bad idea. And, there's no controls for any of them. And, we don't actually need them. And actually autism might be related. And you can see the cognitive awakening of so many doctors, even vaccinologists, even immunologists. And this is because of that. I feel like I feel better about it for my kids, for sure, but helping other people and just having access to this information that we wouldn't have otherwise had, or maybe we did have, Michelle, but I was so close-minded to the possibility that there was malicious, whatever you want to call it, intent,
Yeah. It's so great what you're saying. I totally know this path, right? It's like the first thing is like, the first little piece you learn is like, oh, and then it's like, oh, you mean all of these injections? Like, there's no long-term safety studies for any of them. There's no, these are things, again, I'm not a scientist, but I started discovering these things, and it's shocking. And I think it takes something. I don't know. Do you think that more people are going to eventually see this?
100%. 100%. It's already happening. Women that I know who just had babies are not vaccinating their babies. And a year ago they would have. 100%. Wow. And that's happening. And it's not even happening with that. It's happening with the toxins in our food. It's happening with what's happening with the geoengineering that's now becoming mainstream. All the things. People are becoming aware, and it's a wonderful awakening. It's painful. And it's really infuriating because we've been allowing this to kind of progress and happen for so long. But there's a lot of mad mama bears, I'll tell you, and data bears. But yeah.
How do you see the future? You kind of answered it, but how do you see things going?
For me personally?
For the planet, clearly, you're saying people are seeing more clearly, and yet there's still a vast majority of people who do not see, who will not see, who won't. Honestly, it takes courage to look, right? Like, I think one of the problems, we talked, you said it perfectly earlier about the ego is the biggest thing in the way, right? And ego being not just the negative, but the positive, anything where you're latched onto an identity, and the identity is so threatened by ideas that are previously unthinkable that it wants to just keep you safe. Not really, though, ironically, but it just wants to keep you safe, right? And, I grew up with a certain set of beliefs politically and about the world that I've done a complete 180 on. Complete 180. I will just say this. I was not right wing. I was not I was none of these things. And I was so afraid when I was younger to even look at the other side of whatever issue it was. And what I discovered is that, wow, there's this smorgasbord of ideas out there. If you're willing to look, you're going to look at some and go, yeah, that's not really accurate, right? And you're going to look at others. Oh, that's an interesting perspective. But it's just like life is so much more rich when you're willing to look.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's funny that you say that, because I also was super like, man, I came from BC. I was a climate alarmist. We're going to die. The world is going to burn. And it's all because of fossil fuels and all this stuff. It's you're a product of your environment. And those things have changed. And for me, they've changed in a good way. And I've been able to see a lot of things. There's people in BC who aren't able to. And I wonder about that. I mean, you're also in your confirmation circle, right? Like the people you hang out with, unless you go and you move to the outside of the country and you're asked some tough questions that you all of a sudden can't answer. And you're like, oh, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Why do I hate Donald Trump? Oh, because they told me to. I don't know. Things like that. Like, why do you have to have original thought. So to get out of your original thought, you need to sometimes remove yourselves from this circle of confirmation bias that happens. I think it's so challenging though, because if I were to think what I know to be true now, what I feel to be true now, and if I were to put myself, it's funny actually, my husband and I just celebrated 5 years of marriage on the 31st of August. We got married right before the thing happened, right? The thing. And I was just thinking about where my brain was at on that day. I mean, obviously it was whatever, but like where I was at in my belief system and how like it couldn't have been, you couldn't have written the movie. It was just, it's so different now. And how, if I was given all this information at once, what that would have done to my psyche. Like the human mind can only take so much. Like, yes, they're spraying our skies. Yes, they fluoridate the water to dull us down. Like all these things that, all of these things, the genetic vaccine, everything. If you think about that all at once, that's like, where are we? Who is controlling this? Why, we're not so safe. Our governments don't have our best interest in fact. What are governments and what is the WEF? Like all of those things, it really hurts to just pull all that off at once. So I don't know how people can do that quicker, but you have to lead yourself down the road with little crumbs, right? Take a little crumb, take another little crumb. And that's sort of what's happened, I think, since 2020. There's been these crumbs of things, right? And the people who are unable to see that right now for whatever reason, whether it's cognitive dissonance, their ego, the trauma that would be associated with that, they are going to require soft shoulders and big hugs, right? So all we can do is be like, we've been there, or I it's okay. I love you. You're a human. We've got each other. You walked through your fire. We're here now, and move forward together and seek to understand. That's all we can do.
Yeah, see, it just reminded me why I just fell in love with you instantly.
I mean, that's like that. It's important that we remain connected to the fact that we are, as Canadians, we humans, but mostly as Canadians, because we've really a trying time in our government and in our country that is like China right now, like just totally, there's some really weird things in our country, and we lost a lot of rights, and we had this identity that was challenged and is being challenged by this government who is trying to destroy us from within. And I think that the division that is constantly being perpetrated by constantly divide. The only way we get through on the other side is if we refuse to let it divide us, right? And come together. And that's just why, there's certain things that I can't forgive that I haven't been able to, but most of the time I'm like, we got you. Let's move forward. Yeah.
I just have to address something totally unrelated. So It is so humid where I am that my glasses are fogging up. I'm looking at you, and my like I have never.
Do you want to?
I have never. Like I need little windshield wipers. I can't see her out of this eye. Oh, I'm going to disrobe a little bit here.
Okay, cool.
Okay, yeah, okay. So I just had to say that because I'm so distracted, and you've got to look at her and going, okay, can't see. All right. So back to the important things. I just want to say that, I'm so simpatico with everything you just said. How do you? Because I think it's like there's this duality that we constantly are having to both, face the truth and stay with our compassion for the people who have not been great with us. How do you do that? How do you navigate that? Even more so, how do you navigate staying joyful, hopeful, particularly with kids that you're raising, and at the same time witness what's happening?
I do that by building. We are not involved. We're not plugged into the matrix. Like we are not. My kids don't go to school, so that is number one. And we have an amazing community of like-minded people that we found early and we built up. And our families. Like we're very fortunate because my immediate family and most of my extended family were all on the same page.
Wow.
It's been really, really important. And I can't imagine not having that, but I know I know I'm the exception, not the rule. So because of that unification and solidarity and how we think and feel and our values are the same, it's been easier. But like, there's a lot of people that at the beginning, like all of my colleagues, like and back to my wedding, like all of my bridesmaids cut off contact with me. Like, I shouldn't say that. My sister was my maid of honor. She's obviously still in there like a dirty shirt. Love you, Annie. But all of my bridesmaids from British Columbia, they couldn't. And it was over a text to them. I said, ladies, listen, there's going to be this was before they even announced the injections. I said, there's going to be this injection. I know lots of you want to have kids. Like, we don't know what's going on. Just if you have any questions, let me know, blah, blah, blah. Just that love, just me showing concern. They just cut me off. So that, I don't know, maybe one day they'll come back, maybe not. That was hard. All of my peers and my colleagues from all over the world, nobody's called to ask me how I am or what happened even. They just, I can't even imagine. Laura went off the deep end. Crazy. She's so crazy. And now they see me probably that, there's that crazy lady. But, it doesn't really bother me, Michelle. And I think it's because I'm so comforted by the fact that the silent majority of us, there's way more of us.
I agree. It's funny. I wish your story was rare. Sorry, I heard it.
Yeah, I know.
That's the really, and we don't have to get into I think we've all experienced that, right? This division, this losing of friends, this parting of relationships. It's been very, very difficult for all of us. But I do agree with you that there's something quite beautiful on the other side of it, right? I was telling somebody, so I'm coaching people, and I was coaching someone who was concerned that, the pool had shrunk, of available men, right? Because she's now like, so have you had a shot, right? And I said, well, no, the pool hasn't shrunk. It's actually easier now because before you might be attracted to someone, but you don't actually share the same values. So you'd be like going through these relationships painfully and then breaking up because you find out that, there's chemistry, but there's really nothing behind it. But now people are walking around with a sign. Here's my values.
That's a great point.
Sorting process, one layer of it, right?
Way easier. That's so funny.
And that's not to say anything against people who were coerced, who were manipulated, who were duped, right? But if you're unwilling to look, if you're unwilling to look, then
if you have 9 jabs by now, probably it's not gonna work out.
You know what I'm saying? Right? Like,
yeah. If you're wearing a mask by yourself right now, please go away.
There's not really much we can talk about, right? Yeah. In the beginning, oh my God, I have nothing but compassion. All of us, it was kind of coming full circle. All of us were duped to one degree or another,
right.
so we
right.
have to find compassion for each other, right? We're all susceptible. We're all vulnerable. And people are still, people who saw things are still being duped by false narratives, so it's part of our, inherent human vulnerability.
That's right. And wanting to do the right thing. And they thought they were doing the right thing and all this stuff. But if you wished death on the unvaccinated, then, that kind of that puts you in a different echelon.
Yeah.
Toronto Star.
Yes. God, for those who don't know the Toronto Star, I don't even know how to describe it. I remember when it happened, it was like, is this a joke?
Yeah.
On their cover printed these horrible editorial quotes about wishing the unvaccinated dead and not like, really? Did you wish the Amish dead before this? Like, what happened?
What a litmus test for human nature, huh? Like, it was. Yeah, it was pretty brutal. But anyways, I think also that was an attempt, and a successful attempt for all intents and purposes, at division, right? Like, and that was about dividing us and saying that there's some kind of difference here. And that was the attempt by the government at a medical apartheid. And I think if there's anybody that needs to be blamed, it is the government. It is the government. I mean, the people, yes, we expect more from our fellow Canadians, but we can't forget that this was done to us by the people that we elected. So we need to make that go away. So that's kind of leads me, like, that's where we're at now. Like we were apathetic. We still are. Canadians are very apathetic. And I think the responsibility, we gave our freedoms away pretty willingly and without a fight. And it's harder to claw those ones back. And I think, being more active. And that's one of the things that I've maintained is, like, people are like, oh, you're still involved? Like, aren't you tired? I mean, yeah, but I don't want this to happen again. Like, my grandfather didn't bleed for this country for no reason. Like, we can do better, guys. And I think being involved with grassroots, getting involved in things like World Council for Health and with Canada and local.
You want to just say a little bit about that, since that's new?
It is, and it's there goes my child. Sorry, I have to edit that out. Yeah, the World Council for Health is, oh, okay, great. It's an organization. It started in the UK by Tess Laurie and a couple of other doctors, Dr. Tess Laurie, and now it's turning into country councils that are then, signing up as signatories. It doesn't have to just be a council. Organization can join, individuals can join. Certainly coming together as countries that have their own steering committee and being involved at this sort of like conglomerate of countries that all agree on certain things. And the things that they agree on are, bodily autonomy, imagine, holistic health, doing things that make sense, being better. It's like building better. And it's amazing. So doctors, Mark Trozzi, Ted Coots is involved, Dr. Lana Nichols. There's a couple of other people involved in the steering committee. And we are now, Canada is now a signatory. We have our own little logo, and we bring to the table. It's about leaning on each other too. Like, Japan is doing cool things. How can we learn from them? Or, the government tries this power grab and this, how do we stand up? And, they serve papers to Tedros and they have lawyers, and it's like a bigger body of people standing up and saying no across the globe. and saying, we reject the UN, we reject the WHO. They don't have any jurisdiction over here. These are unelected people making decisions about what we should do to our bodies. Like that, that's insane. And the other piece of it that I think is really important is education. So I think part of it is, it's not meant to be any governing body. It's meant to be supplying information, educating people, doing big symposiums on, what's a PMA, or how can we do this better, or all these different things. And I think it's just a great way forward. And I'm really excited to be part of it. It's sort of in its infancy. There's a Substack where we're going to talk about things. It's on. I share it on my Twitter, so you can find that on there. Or Dr. Mark Trozy, he's got lots of information on it. So it's pretty cool.
I really like the work of the World Council for Health. And in fact, Dr. Trozy has been on this show and Dr. Laurie has been on this show. And I was in Tess's office when I was in the UK. So I got to see, where it all starts, right? And one of the things I love is I find the tone of what you're doing is very positive, everything down to, I know that in the UK, they did a detox fair. Right? Like, what a great idea. Like, let's make this engaging. Let's make this interesting, right? So practical information that's not focused so much on the, potential alteration of DNA.
Yes, totally. Yeah. Like, it's not, because like a lot of people are in the position now where you don't want to be scary. Like, let's stop ruminating on that a little bit and talk about how we can fix it or look forward and progress and not regress. I really like that too. And I mean, those people like Dr. Laurie is just, what an amazing, beautiful human. So people there's just full of people like that. There's so many people like that. And having all of these critical thinking humans, but that are advocates for other humans, people they don't even know, coming together, doing things so beautiful. And then, standing up. And I'm wondering what they try next. I'm wondering how scary we are. How scary that kind of thing is to the WHO, and I think the internet is really helping us communicate these ideas, obviously. But I mean, when we're organized and we are a body of force, then they have less power, right?
Yep.
So,
yeah. Is there anything else that you want to say? Is there any, I don't know, if you have any final words that you have?
I don't think so. We've covered a lot, but I guess communicating, people will think, and I told this to actually, I'll stop and I'll just communicate this more clearly to you. I was in the office of a politician a couple months ago and he said, Laura, COVID is over. Why are you even talking about this? And I said, Mr. blah, blah, blah. COVID isn't over until the public health officers of Canada stop pushing the injections on the citizens of Canada. Currently, they're still doing that. So it's not over, and that kind of outreach and education still has to happen. We have to communicate as humans still. We have to spread this word because it's not just that. They're already starting 15-minute cities. There's one in Edmonton. There's one here on PEI. There's another one, Saskatoon somewhere. Like the infiltration and the influence of globalism in our country needs to be stopped because we are Canada. We have our identity. We don't need a globalist identity. We need our country back. And until the citizens of the country start to unify on that message, they're going to continue to try. So let's just keep on talking back to them. Let's continue to stand up and say, no, you're not doing that. I have rights as a human and you can't take them away. And then I think that's enough of us to do that and they'll just stop maybe. Until then, grow your own food.
Very good advice. And get to your local farmers.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's just such a joy talking to you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
I've had the privilege of meeting many impressive scientists and doctors over the past few years, but few have the ability to balance the scientific and the esoteric, logic and intuition. It is Dr. Laura Braden's respect for the holistic nature of human beings and the reassurance to never dismiss your intuition that is the first of many wise takeaways from our conversation. The past few years have created a culture of pseudoscientific bullying. People who know far less than Dr. Braden about the nature of immunity and cellular biology walk around regurgitating talking points created by some of the most corrupt companies in the world and think they've done their research. It is time, long past time, for people to get out of their confirmation bias circle to find the truth, as uncomfortable as it may be. And that's my second lesson gleaned from our talk. Consistent with what Dr. Robert Malone said in our last episode, people need to find multiple sources of information. And I would add multiple perspectives. We need to open ourselves to ideas and opinions contrary to our existing bias. Dr. Laura Braden stepped way out of her sphere of reference, knowledge, and comfort and opened herself up to a world of information that is now making a difference in the lives of her family, her community, and of thousands of people who have heard her speak out. It's not just her willingness to speak, but the unshakable truth as her foundation for self-confidence and self-expression that is my third of many gems taken from this conversation. I've always admired people with the integrity to change their minds based on their exposure to new information or a more compelling perspective, and the confidence to do so without concern for what people think. Dr. Laura Braden is an accomplished scientist who had the courage to look newly at everything she believed to be true, to admit where she was mistaken, and to boldly speak out. In our current climate of tribal alliances and ever-divided camps, where those who participated in the greatest medical crime in history are doubling down to protect themselves, this quality is needed now more than ever. Transformation will not come by voting in the next political actor. It is up to each of us to admit where we were duped, examine where we can take responsibility, and be the change. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation and will join me for more. If you'd like, share your insights in the comments section, and please hit the subscribe button. Stay tuned, be true to yourself, and remember that we are the ones we've been waiting for.